Bonjour tout le monde, Alexandre Boulerice, député de Rosemont-Petite-Patrie. Je suis avec mon collègue Charlie Angus. Ce dont je souhaite vous parler d'emblée aujourd'hui, c'est vraiment la catastrophe que représente le plan qui a été mis de l'avant aujourd'hui par le gouvernement libéral en ce qui concerne le plafond d'émissions de gaz à effet de serre pour le secteur pétrolier et gazier. On est au mois de décembre, il neige dehors. Mais là, M. Trudeau puis M. Guilbeault viennent de donner le plus gros cadeau de Noël aux compagnies pétrolières et gazières. C'est absolument épouvantable, c'est une catastrophe. Depuis 2 ans qu'on attend cette annonce-là, les libéraux probablement se sont traînés les pieds. Et là, ce qu'on voit aujourd'hui, c'est un fromage gruyère. Tout le monde avait dit à M. Guilbeault, il ne faut pas avoir d'échappatoire, pas de compensation, puis pas de délai. Ce qu'on nous présente ce matin, c'est des échappatoires, des compensations, puis des délais, avec des cibles qui sont absolument ridicules par rapport aux autres secteurs de l'économie québécoise et canadienne. C'est une énorme déception. En fait, pour vous parler très franchement, ce n'est pas un plafond, c'est un torchon. Ça ne vaut pas grand-chose, puis je pense que M. Guilbeault il doit être très content d'être à Dubaï en ce moment, puis de parler à d'autres personnes, parce qu'à sa place, je ne serais vraiment pas fier de ce qui a été présenté aux Québécois puis aux Canadiens ce matin. C'est vraiment pas à la hauteur. Et en plus de ça, on vient de donner beaucoup de temps, beaucoup de délais aux compagnies pétrolières et gazières, après qu'on leur ait donné 12 milliards de dollars pour être capable de faire de la capture du carbone qui relève plus de la pensée magique que de la science puis d'un effort réel pour réduire notre impact climatique puis environnemental. Sur ce, je laisse la parole à M. Angus, puis je vous reviens aux besoins.
We are dealing with a situation of a planetary catastrophe, and Canada is the ultimate outlier in the G7. While all other countries are seeing significant reductions, this country remains very much in the grips of the petroleum industry, and Mr. Guilbeault and Mr. Trudeau have just given an enormous Christmas present to the oil industry. This cap is not credible at all. The government and the Liberals have missed every single target they've made. When we look at what this cap entails, it's a whole bunch of Hail Marys that carbon capture will somehow work by 2030 when we see no evidence worked up till now. Massive amounts of tax incentives to give to big oil to run this fiction. The fact that they can do all kinds of supposed carbon offsets and buying. We are not going to meet the 2030 targets. We are not anywhere close to them. And this emissions cap, I think, is going to be a perfect example of the ongoing failure of this government on the environment. I want to just also speak this morning on the fact that we came out of 8 hours of legislative abuse attempting to pass the sustainable jobs legislation. The sustainable jobs legislation is important work for parliamentarians. All of us come here from across this country, from all political parties, to do fundamental work, which is to pass legislation in the interests of Canadian people. Regardless of our points of view, we come to the table to work on that legislation. The C-50 legislation on sustainable jobs is about ensuring that workers, First Nation people, environmentalists have a seat at the table as we deal with this ongoing energy crisis and transformation. Unfortunately, under Pierre Poilievre, we are seeing goon squad tactics used at committees. We're seeing harassment, intimidation. We went through over 8 hours of shouting and harassment that looked like some kind of thug match. This is not parliamentary. This is not what happens in Parliament. I have never seen this kind of intimidation and harassment that's been unleashed by Pierre Poilievre, to the point where they came up with 20,000 bogus chatbot amendments thinking they could shut down the work of Parliament. Now, I know that chatbot might be more intelligent than many Conservatives, but it shows a fundamental disrespect. We could not even hear the voting from the shouting that was going on, the intimidation. There were some very, very ugly scenes. I'm raising this because, you know, the word bullying gets passed around all the time. Everybody in Parliament's accusing each other of bullying. It's like watching, you know, certain European soccer players rolling around on the pitch crying for a red flag. And so I get that people don't necessarily pay attention to that, but I want to put on the record, what's happening in Parliament right now is a very, very dangerous trend. A trend to shut down the work that we do, a trend to intimidate MPs, a trend to go after individual MPs who are doing their job. This is the goon squad thuggery that is being practiced by the Poilievre Conservatives. We as New Democrats will not give in to it. We will do our work, but it is imperative that Parliament respect some basic rules and guidance that's always existed, but are being systematically undermined by Poilievre and his new tactics. You would never see Aaron O'Toole pull this kind of stuff. Even Stephen Harper, who, man, his people were as tough and mean as you could be. They respected the process of Parliament. Democracy needs this. I'm very, very concerned about where we're going, and anyone who watched the footage from last night's attempt to pass legislation, I think, will be rightfully shocked and appalled at the degraded state of democracy that we're seeing in Parliament right now.
M. Boulerice, vous dites que c'est un gruyère ce qui est présenté aujourd'hui. Il reste qu'il y a quand même un plafond qui va être imposé dans les faits. C'est un régime qui est plus strict que ce que le Québec a fait, par exemple, parce qu'il y a un plafond qui est imposé à cette industrie-là. C'est quand même plus que ce que n'importe quel autre gouvernement fédéral a fait avant ça. Est-ce que c'est honnête de dire que c'est un torchon?
Bien, pour nous, c'est une immense déception parce qu'il n'y a aucune obligation avant 2030. Même s'il y a des cibles, ils sont quand même les plus basses de tous les secteurs d'activité économique au Canada. Donc, c'est un privilège incroyable que les libéraux viennent de donner aux compagnies gazières et pétrolières. C'est un véritable cadeau après leur d'avoir donné des subventions. Et on ne parle que de souplesse. Mais excusez-moi, là, la souplesse, c'est bien beau, mais la lutte au changement climatique, c'est pas un cours de yoga. OK? Quand on fait des règles, puis ça fait en sorte qu'on peut continuer à augmenter la production gazière puis pétrolière au Canada, même le plafond qu'ils mettent de l'avant puis la cible, comment est-ce qu'ils vont être capables de l'atteindre en augmentant la production?
Mais vous, dans votre entente avec le Parti libéral, il y avait un point qui était faire sortir le Canada du pétrole, je résume, là. Mais il n'y a pas de chiffre, il n'y a pas de cible là-dedans. Comment vous allez faire pour forcer ça?
Écoutez, il va falloir que M. Guilbeault, là, il revienne à un moment donné au pays, puis il a la raison, puis qu'il réponde aux questions. Puis on va lui dire, écoutez, c'est pas acceptable, ça. Puis on va continuer à mettre de la pression pour faire en sorte qu'on soit en accord avec l'objectif de Paris puis du 1,5 degré. Le dernier rapport du commissaire à l'environnement montre que systématiquement, les libéraux ratent leur cible de réduction de gaz à effet de serre. Puis c'est pas avec ce qu'on a vu ce matin qu'on va être capable de régler le problème. Il va falloir que M. Guilbeault assume ses responsabilités puis réponde aux questions.
Même l'Institut climatique trouve qu'il y a peut-être moyen d'aller chercher, de réduire ces émissions-là avec des techniques innovantes, avec l'innovation.
Bien, écoutez, les techniques innovantes puis l'innovation, là, ça, c'est la baguette magique technologique. C'est exactement le plan de Pierre Poilievre que Stephen Guilbeault vient de prendre aujourd'hui. C'est de dire la technologie va tout régler. Alors que cette technologie de capture du carbone, elle n'est pas prouvée, elle n'a pas été démontrée, puis elle n'est pas efficace. Donc, en ce moment, là, la grosse différence entre les libéraux et les conservateurs, c'est que les conservateurs ne font même pas à semblant d'essayer.
Toujours la même question, mais l'appui du NPD au gouvernement Trudeau, est-ce qu'il est menacé par ça?
Vous savez, on est extrêmement déçus. Il va falloir qu'on ait des discussions franches puis sérieuses. Il y a des choses qu'on veut mener à terme, qui sont dans l'entente, qui sont importantes pour les gens, les travailleurs et les travailleuses. Projet de loi anti-briseur de grève, les soins dentaires pour les aînés, les adolescents, puis ensuite de ça, tout le monde, le logement autochtone, le logement en général pour la situation, les prix du panier d'épicerie. On a beaucoup, beaucoup de travail à faire. Nous, on veut que le Parlement fonctionne, qu'on avance, puis qu'on livre la marchandise pour les gens. Puis sinon, bon, on va évoluer à toutes les semaines.
Est-ce que vous avez des nouvelles de la négo sur l'assurance médicaments? Est-ce qui se passe avec les conservateurs? Est-ce que ça a un impact?
Vous devrez demander à mon collègue, l'honorable M. Don Davis, qui s'occupe du dossier qui pilote tout ça.
Ça vous inquiète pas? Il reste 2 semaines, la session est moins. Là. Il reste une semaine et 2 jours. Un jour.
Un jour et demi?
Vous savez, tant que c'est pas fait, mais je connais les négociations, ça peut débouler très vite à la dernière minute. Merci.
Mr. Angus, can I ask you a question for yesterday's committee? It seemed that you were obstructing the obstruction of the Conservatives. So what tactic did you put in place yesterday evening?
What we did as New Democrats was to try and stay the focus we had to get votes passed. We were instructed by Parliament, so it was to continually call for the vote. The chair was being shouted at, the clerk was being shouted at. There were some very, very ugly scenes. A Bloc MP, a woman was, I found the shouting from the Conservatives very intimidating. So it was to try and stay focused. We are here to do a job. We've been 6 weeks of filibustering and games playing and not even allowing people to speak. So we went in determined to get that legislation passed for workers. Thank you.
Merci tout le monde.
What are your thoughts on what the government announced today?
Well, we're going to have to see all the details of the emissions cap, but here's the main thing that I would say. The Natural Resources Minister actually just admitted in the House of Commons exactly what the emissions cap is all about. You might have heard, he told the truth. He said it's a production cap. That's exactly the intention of the NDP Liberals, no matter what they try to spin now. I think what's galling is that these NDP Liberals are off in a global conference in a petro-state, and they are announcing and imposing policies and laws that will damage Canadian workers, Canadian communities, make power and fuel more expensive. They should get home. They should actually be working with Canadians. They should be announcing Canadian policy and Canadian laws in Canada. But it is very, very telling that the Natural Resources Minister, for the first time today, actually let it slip and admitted what their actual intent is, which is a production cap. What's wild is that these NDP Liberals have been absolutely skewered by the Supreme Court of Canada on their provincial violation and their never build anything ever unconstitutional law that they passed 5 years ago, still haven't fixed. And on top of that, have just been skewered by the federal court on their plastics decree that they did with no debate, no consultation, no expert testimony at all, for also violating provincial jurisdiction. So it is clear more than ever that these NDP Liberals are not worth the cost, will do anything to ram through their anti-energy, anti-development, it sure is, anti-energy, anti-development, anti-Canadian, anti-resources policies and laws that without a shadow of a doubt will disproportionately harm certain regions, certain provinces, make fuel and power more expensive and less reliable for all Canadians, but specifically, and this is the worst, hurt Indigenous workers, Indigenous communities, rural and remote communities that have no options for fuel and power sources. This is why Conservatives will greenlight green projects and expand Canadian oil and gas development for Canadian energy self-sufficiency, security, and to actually support free and democratic allies around the world.
In a riding like yours, what are people thinking, and what impact does what announced today risk have?
I thank you for asking that so much. This is the truth. None of these policies or announcements really can be seen in isolation. They all fit together, these top-down anti-energy, anti-private sector, anti-development policies, laws, and taxes that the NDP Liberals have been incrementally imposing over 8 years, which has caused a flood of $300 billion of energy investment, projects, jobs, businesses, more than 300,000 jobs since. Now, a riding like mine, about 100,000 people who depend on the livelihoods and the work in oil and gas, in heavy oil, in petrochemicals, in refining and upgrading, all the service and supply work, and most importantly, 9 Indigenous communities between 5 First Nations and 4 Métis settlements who are all working in traditional oil and gas and in clean and renewable energy development. Constituents like mine know that they are public enemy number 1, who will be crushed by the NDP Liberals' anti-energy, anti-private sector agenda. But what's really galling is it will hurt the paychecks, the budgets, affordability, fuel and power sources for every Canadian in every corner of this country. But most impactful, the most hurtful, will be to those people in rural, remote, Indigenous communities who have no other viable options or choices. And that's the truth and the stakes of this costly coalition. They have done untold economic damage to this country. They have put Canada behind dictator oil producers, behind U.S. oil, behind every international major oil and gas producing jurisdiction that Canada competes with. Only Canada has the highest standards in the world. And the consequences are not just destruction of the Canadian economy, millions of job losses, and skyrocketing fuel and power costs. It will be, I hope, not permanent, but what is happening in real time after 8 years and will continue to happen is damage and divisiveness to the unity of our country. That's why Conservatives will turn hurt into hope, greenlight green projects, expand Canadian oil and gas, jobs, businesses, money for all Canadians in every corner of the country, because that's in the best interest of Canada.
So sorry, but I'm keeping Mr. Schmale waiting here.
Thank you all for being here. As Greens, we start with the climate science, and that is that we have a closing window of opportunity. We know that emissions, according to the IPCC, need to peak at the absolute latest by 2025. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says we are on a highway to climate hell. It's in this context that the PM announced over 2 years ago now at COP26 this so-called cap on emissions. Today, we learn what 2,000 meetings with big oil will get you. First of all, it'll get you a framework in place of actual regulations. It gets you a cap that actually is going to allow for production to continue to increase even above 2019 levels, which themselves have increased doubled since 1990. It allows for big oil to buy their way out of this cap, actually using the funds that they have gouged Canadians at the pumps for with their excess profits in recent years. And it allows for a cap that is significantly weakened even over the insufficient target that the PM announced over 2 years ago now. This is a violation of our Paris Agreement, and make no mistake, decisions that are being made today are a theft of our children's future. This cap is a win for oil and gas lobbyists. As Greens, we will continue to call for what is required, which is an immediate and urgent transition to renewables, an end to all new fossil fuel infrastructure, an end to subsidies to big oil, using those very funds to support Canadians struggling with affordability and support them to take action on climate, for example, by replenishing the Greener Homes grants, a critical program that is necessary to help incentivize Canadians to take meaningful, urgent climate action. Thank you. Thank you.
Look, I just want to talk quickly about some of the actions from the Conservative Party of Canada right now. If anybody watched the unbelievable childish behavior and shenanigans that took place at the Natural Resources Committee on behalf of Conservative MPs, you will have no doubt left in your mind that they have zero respect for this place or for our parliamentary system. It was shameful what they did. They came in with a huge number of Conservative MPs to effectively try and bully members of the government, the New Democratic Party, and the Bloc Québécois, and it was a farce and a joke, and I think any Canadian who watched that would be ashamed. Now, what they are planning to do this evening with regards to the Ways and Means motions is hold Canada back. They're proposing over 100 cuts to things like the environment, like agriculture, like public safety, like the RCMP. And when those fail, because inevitably the government and the responsible opposition parties are going to stand against bullies and stand up for Canadians, they are going to vote against things like affordable housing, like changes to the Competition Act, like making sure that the services that are available for Canadians are there. But this is typical of the Conservatives under Pierre Poilievre, and what we're seeing is that this is a direct reflection of right-wing American politics in the United States. We've seen this playbook from the extreme right wing of the Republican Party that has tried to shut down the U.S. government, and now Pierre Poilievre and his caucus are trying to bring those same tactics here to Canada. That is unacceptable. We should be very concerned about this. And at the end of the day, to what end? To what purpose? He's not telling the truth to Canadians about the price on pollution. He's not telling the truth to Canadians about what he's doing. And I think this is something that is egregious. Look, we're going to be here as long as we need to be here to stand up for Canadians. That's our job. That's why we were sent to Ottawa. But I think if anyone watched the behavior and the attitude of the Conservative members on the Natural Resources Committee last night, that's not what they elected representatives to do. They elect representatives to be responsible, to be respectful, and to defend Canadians.
Pour la suite des choses, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire pour la fin des travaux? Est-ce que vous allez devoir vous repousser la fin des travaux pour compenser peut-être du temps perdu? Qu'est-ce que vous allez faire?
Bon, on va travailler durement, mais ce que nous allons faire, c'est vraiment travailler avec tous les partis dans la Chambre. Nous sommes toujours ouverts de travailler avec les conservateurs s'ils veulent vraiment faire le travail pour les Canadiens, mais ce n'est pas ce qu'on a vu récemment et on ne sait pas ce qu'ils vont faire les prochains jours. Mais pour assurer que nous pourrions arriver, excusez-moi, avant Noël pour assurer que justement ces importants changements dans les projets de loi pour arriver au construire des nouveaux appartements pour arriver à changer l'acte sur la compétition ici au Canada, entre autres, soit au moins passé pour la Chambre et envoyé au Sénat. Mais on va faire tout ce que nous pourrions pour arrêter les jeux partisans des conservateurs. Merci.
Envisager de prolonger le calendrier parlementaire, rajouter une semaine avant Noël, disons, de travaux?
Je ne crois pas que ça serait nécessaire, mais parce qu'on va assurer que nous gagnons ces votes aujourd'hui, mais aussi pour assurer que les Canadiens savent qu'il y a 3 partis responsables dans ces chambres. Les libéraux, les néo-démocrates et le Bloc québécois, qui respectent les institutions démocratiques. Il y a un seul parti qui ne respecte pas les institutions démocratiques, qui veut faire du Canada ce qu'on voit aux États-Unis avec les politiques d'extrême droite, et il y a des autres partis qui vont défendre ce que sont les valeurs canadiennes. Merci.
Vous allez être capable d'adopter le projet de loi sur la mise à jour économique de l'automne avant Noël, de le déposer, de l'adopter?
On va faire tout ce que nous pourrions pendant ces prochains jours. Merci.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wanted to just make some remarks on grocery prices. We've seen a new report come out just recently for academic institutions working together to look at food prices, and we appreciate that. I just wanted to start by saying that the Government of Canada recognizes the challenges that Canadians are facing at the grocery stores. We also recognize it's problematic when you see a highly consolidated grocery industry, as we have in Canada, that have 5 chains really controlling 80% of market share. When we see that happening and we see food prices significantly more inflated than general inflation, and Canadians are struggling, and then we see profits increasing, it's problematic. So we recognize that. We recognize the struggles that Canadians are going through, and we are working to address that. Now, with regards to this report that just came out, there's a projection that says in 2024 that food price inflation will be between 2.5 and 4.5%. Obviously, that's concerning for many Canadians. It's also important to recognize within the context of the last 2 years, that's a significant decrease in food prices as compared to the last 2 years, which food price inflation has been about over 18%. So I also just wanted to point out that the last 2 months in a row that food prices have been stabilizing and coming into closer alignment with general inflation, which is exactly what our government has been focused on, which is to stabilize food prices. That means bringing food price inflation in alignment with general inflation. So these are good signs. There's more work to do. We are focused right now on responding to the Competition Bureau's report, which has said we need more competition in our grocery industry. And what we're doing currently is we've got a bill before Parliament, C-56, which is the Affordability Act, which significantly strengthens our competition laws and will help stabilize food prices for Canadians. Unfortunately, we see the Conservatives filibustering and obstructing Parliament and don't seem to want to support competition in this country. Just yesterday, they voted against a national student nutrition program, which would help kids and families access affordable, healthy meals in schools. So we feel that their position is disingenuous when they stand up in the House of Commons every day and claim, that there's large food bank lineups and that they're really concerned about that. They don't seem to be concerned about that when it comes to passing key pieces of legislation that will help Canadians or supporting programs that are going to help families put food on the table. The last thing I'll say is just this week at the Agriculture and Agri-Food Standing Committee, we had grocery chain CEOs come and confirm that the meeting that they had with Minister Freeland and Minister Champagne and the action plans that they put forward are making a difference, that they are implementing measures, discounts and price freezes in the grocery stores, and that they wouldn't have done that if that meeting hadn't have taken place. So these are good signs. We know we've got lots more work to do, but I want Canadians to know that we empathize with the position that they're in, and we're working hard to increase competition, which will ultimately stabilize and hopefully lower prices in the future. Thank you.
On va descendre ça un peu. Juste rappeler aussi aux Canadiens, Canadiennes, Québécois, Québécoises qu'il y a 2 ans, la ministre de l'Agriculture et le ministre de la Montagne au Québec ont co-présidé pour mettre en implémentation un code de conduite pour les épiciers. Aujourd'hui, depuis quelques jours, notre gouvernement et nous-mêmes, nous sommes extrêmement déçus du fait que deux joueurs clés, Walmart et Loblaws, semblent réticents à signer ce code de conduite. Je le rappelle, il y a 2 ans, l'industrie a dit que laissez-nous faire ces devoirs-là, c'est nous qui allons créer ce code de conduite-là, c'est nous qui allons signer ce code de conduite-là. Les producteurs agricoles, les transformateurs et la grande majorité des épiciers sont à la table pour signer. Notre gouvernement est extrêmement déçu du fait que Loblaws et Walmart tardent à signer cette entente. Et nous sommes aujourd'hui, ce matin, le ministre McCauley et le ministre de la Montagne ont émis un communiqué de presse disant qu'ils sont prêts à prendre toutes sortes de mesures et les mettre sur la table. Il y aura des rencontres dans les jours et les semaines à venir avec les ministres partout à travers le Canada pour trouver des solutions. Alors, la meilleure solution, c'est que Loblaws et Walmart signent le code de conduite. Merci beaucoup.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so huge congratulations to Chief Woodhouse. I've had the opportunity to work with her extensively as a regional chief, and she was the lead on the water file. As you know, we have tabled our intent to, or we've put on notice paper the intent to table the legislation. So it's exciting that she's got such a good experience in both being a regional chief, but also in many of the files that I, as a minister, am responsible for.
And in Pratt's concession speech, he mentioned they should put animosity aside and sort of rally behind Woodhouse's sort of collective. What do you make of that message?
Well, you know, a strong AFN is actually really important. It's important, obviously, to the First Nations that it represents, but it's important as a partner to the Government of Canada for the many things that we're attempting to do together to both improve lives for First Nations, improve economic self-determination. So it's a very positive message.
Thank you. Anything else you'd like to share?
Just huge congratulations. It's wonderful to have her there. Thank you.
Any thoughts you'd like to share about
Well, I think it's a great thing for AFN. It's the second woman ever to be national chief. I think Cindy's shown her ability to get things done with things that she's done around childcare. I think Manitoba's leading the country in a lot of things. We have their first First Nations premier there. We have our first First Nations female who is now the national chief there. I have a lot of confidence that she's going to work really hard for First Nations across Canada to deliver.
In Pratt's concession speech, he spoke about the need for everyone to sort of gather around Cindy, and there's been a lot of animosity, a lot of division. What do you make of that message that he said?
I think it's a very positive message. I think that it shows the kind of character of David Pratt. But I think that First Nations, you know, we have our disagreements at times, but when we hold together and work together, we can achieve amazing things. And we're seeing amazing heights that First Nations are achieving across Canada over the past 4 years, 5 years. And so we hope to see that trend continue. And today is just another day of that ability for First Nations to come together and choose a leader and find ways to find collaboration.
Cindy Woodhouse, she was announced AFN chief today. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, well, I want to congratulate National Chief Woodhouse. I think she had a hard-fought campaign, and I look forward to working with her and advancing Indigenous issues with the government.
You know what, I would like to also congratulate David Pratt. He was there right to the end, and as a Saskatchewan guy, I'm proud of the fact that he ran a very good race, and we had two very good candidates right to the end, and also like to congratulate National Chief Woodhouse on her victory.
And Mr. Pratt, when he gave his concession speech, he talked a lot about the divisiveness that sort of accompanied those campaigns. You know, there's been a lot of sort of animosity. He said he was going to put that aside. What do you make of that message?
I would. I haven't seen his concession speech yet, but I would believe Mr. Pratt if that's what he said. And I know there was a lot of talk during the campaign about whoever was elected national chief that they're going to have to build unity within the whole AFN organization and all the chiefs across the country. So I'm sure that's going to be a high priority for the new national chief.
Any thoughts on the mayor saying that won't be showing up?
I'm not aware of anybody else who's attending or not attending. I just know that I'm unfortunately here in Ottawa with my parliamentary duties, and unfortunately unable to attend myself.
What message do you think it sends when leaders do attend those kinds of ceremonies?
Well, I think for me, for the number of years at the City of Calgary, when I was there as a City Councillor now, I always try to get to as many community events as I can and support our ethnocultural and faith communities on important times of the year. Many communities have important days in their communities religiously, and it's important to work with all communities to support them, to learn more about them, and understand and celebrate with them.
Certainly. And, you know, are you talking to your Jewish constituents right now about sort of the situation they're in?
You know, when I am at home in Calgary, I'm talking to all my community members on the issues of concern that they have, and I have an open dialogue, and I've always had an open door policy to talk about issues of their concern and to work with them.
The Natural Resources Committee is going to actually get back on track anytime soon?
Well, we yesterday did some important work last night with Bill C-50, the Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act, and committee moved through all the amendments and did our committee work. So it was a lot of hard work and by the committee members to help get that work done. We will continue now to work on Bill C-49 on the Atlantic Accords to make sure we've seen a significant Conservative filibuster in opposition to the Canadian Sustainable Jobs Act, but also to the Atlantic Accords, which is really important for Atlantic Canada to build wind and renewable power in Eastern Canada, supported by all the Atlantic provinces. Unfortunately, the Conservative Party has tried to block investment and jobs across the country, and that's really unfortunate. But at committee, our job is to make sure we work through the bills and work with stakeholders to make sure that we are advancing these important priorities.
Is the government going to have to do the same thing with C-49 that it did with C-50, and just bring down a sledgehammer?
Well, it's not, the Conservatives have been disrupting our committee work and not working collaboratively with other committee members to advance these important issues. I'm hoping the Atlantic Accords Bill C-49, which is next on our agenda, that we can work through and work with everybody who has a vested interest to producing more energy and more clean jobs across Canada. It's unfortunate that they are blocking billions of dollars of investment and good-paying jobs for Atlantic Canadians. We've seen a ban put in place by Premier Smith in Alberta to prevent clean energy jobs and renewable energy investment. And I think this is a tactic that they're also deploying in other parts of the country, in Atlantic Canada. It's unfortunate, but as committee chair, we'll do what we can to make sure we advance this legislation and the work that needs to be done.
And I respect that you realize that the mayor, you didn't know that he wasn't going to attend. This is just a headline. So it's just, he's saying it's too political, basically.
I believe that, yes. And I've been in committee since 3 a.m. this morning, working through our Natural Resources Committee work and passing that. And I'm not aware of what's happening currently politically in Calgary with those events.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't understand it when the mayor decided she wasn't going, and frankly we've all put out a post on it saying, this is something we need to bring the community together. And all of us have done our efforts to make sure that all the communities in Calgary, all the different communities, the different people that are talking about these incidents in the Middle East are not bringing this home to divide us in Canada. We need to hold together here and understand where our communities are, and this is a big community event, and the mayor's always been there at the menorah lighting, and I'm surprised she didn't take that opportunity to be there again today.
What do you make of her explanation as to the fact that it's now seemed to be supporting Israel as opposed to Calgary's Jewish community? These are her words. What do you make of that argument?
I don't know. I don't know how she's come up with that distinction, so I'll let her comment on how she makes that distinction, but what I've seen so far is that my colleagues will be there. I wish I was there. I've been there before, and I'd be there again. Thank you.
What are you hearing from Calgary's Jewish community, or what have you heard really since October 7th?
From Calgary's Jewish community, we hear a lot of concern about the anti-Semitism they're seeing all across Canada. I mean, this is something that's affecting everybody, and we need to make sure that we stay ahead of it and make sure we don't bring this upon ourselves as far as any kind of discrimination against any people in our society. We have to make sure everybody holds together. We know what our position is as a country, and none of that has deviated to this point in time. We need to make sure we're all together, and we don't stop attending these important cultural events for all our cities. My colleagues and I have been in mosques, we've been in synagogues, we've been everywhere to make sure that we are hearing all the voices on this, and we understand where we stand. Thank you.
What made you, one more question, what do you hope to achieve? What does the Calgary caucus hope to achieve with the letter to the mayor? Are you expressing kind of
Well, it's the issue of the mayor, of course, is mayor, we're all public leaders, and this was a public event where you should show leadership and continue to be there. We don't get to choose the times we govern in, and this is a difficult time. But we face up to this all the time. We make sure we don't divide ourselves from our constituents. Let's listen to the communities and make sure we participate in their cultural and community events. Okay. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, c'est un plaisir pour moi d'être ici en appui à la cause des Ouïghours, à ce qu'ils vont vous présenter, à ce qu'ils vont vous demander. En appui aussi en collaboration avec mon collègue Alexis Brunel du CEP, qui collabore depuis longtemps avec la question des Ouïghours. J'ai eu l'occasion aussi de me rendre cet été à Washington avec le groupe et avec aussi Zamir pour aller faire des représentations auprès du gouvernement américain. Donc, ça fait longtemps que le Bloc est un allié de la cause des Ouïghours et puis nous continuons de l'être. C'est ce que je confirme aujourd'hui en étant présent lors de cette conférence de presse. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. My name is Mehmet Tohti, Executive Director of Ottawa-based Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project. As of this morning, we and the Human Rights Action Group have submitted the recommendation paper to the Sanction Division of Global Affairs and asking our government to impose sanctions for 7 Chinese companies tied up with Uyghur forced labor in seafood industries. And those Chinese companies have exposure in Canadian supply chain as well. At the same time, this morning, we have successfully completed one event in the Parliament Hill with the participation of Undersecretary Robert Silver from the Department of Homeland Security and Executive Director of Customs and the Border Protection from the United States. And as an organization, we are trying hard to create some sort of the dialogue and information sharing between U.S. and Canada to address the forced labor issue. Because so far, CBSA did not seize any single shipment of goods made by the use of Uyghur forced labor. And for that reason, we try to bring this issue to the attention of Canadian public. And here, the Executive Director of Human Rights Action Group, the Sarah Teach. At the same time, she's a legal counsel of Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project.
Thank you, Mehmet. So I'll just say a few words about the importance of this request and the potential impact of sanctions on these Chinese companies. And after I speak, we'll hear in greater detail from Ian Urbina about the evidence to back this up. Essentially, as Mehmet noted, these 7 Chinese companies have ties to Canadian importers. Specifically, Highliner Foods is the biggest one, but there are others as well. And there's compelling evidence that they use Uyghur forced labor. The imposition of sanctions that we're requesting specifically are that the schedule to the CIMA China regulations be amended to include these 7 names. These were the regulations that were passed in 2021 to sanction 4 individuals and 1 entity with responsibility for crimes against Uyghurs, including genocide. And so the mechanism is already in place, and this schedule would just need to be amended to add these 7 companies. And we argue that the legal threshold that's present in the regulations is met and that these 7 entities can be added. The impact of this is huge. It would prohibit Canadians anywhere in the world, as well as anyone in Canada, from engaging in various dealings with these companies. So it would effectively prevent the import of goods from these companies in addition to other financial dealings. This is a way to ensure that products from at least these 7 entities that are made using Uyghur forced labor do not reach Canadian shelves. So I'll leave it there for now and happy to answer questions about any of that and pass it on to Ian.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Ian Urbina. I'm a journalist. I'm based in Washington, D.C. I spent 20 years at the New York Times and then created my own organization called the Outlaw Ocean Project. We do deep investigations of crimes at sea around the world, human rights and environmental crimes. The last 4 years we spent getting on Chinese ships around the world and investigating labor conditions and other crimes on these ships, and then also looking at crimes in the Chinese processing infrastructure in China. And what we found in the infrastructure in China, in the processing plants in Shandong province in particular, is a widespread use of forced labor, Uyghur forced labor, North Korean forced labor. The next big challenge for us was then to show that this seafood is reaching the rest of the world. Indeed it is, and much of it is coming to Canada and the US. That part of the investigation was tracing sort of trade data that connects these processing plants with major brands in Canada and the US, and then showing ways in which it's getting by customs officials. It's not a huge challenge to get it by customs officials, especially in Canada, since there are laws on the books, but they're not being enforced to stop these products tied to forced labor. So I'm here today simply to sort of discuss the evidence for anyone that's interested to ask how we went about achieving it. In short, the challenge in reporting these crimes in China and connecting to seafood involved how do you get eyes into the plants and prove that there are Uyghur laborers in these processing plants. And that was largely done by investigators on the ground, visiting the facilities with cameras, and also using open source intelligence, so cell phone footage from workers that are filming themselves doing the work, this material. And then also companies themselves in China were very open in their internal newsletters about the use of Xinjiang labor and thanking the government for helping them deal with labor shortages, especially after COVID. And that became another piece of evidence that was extremely helpful. So now the evidence is very strong and clear, and the 7 companies that are being petitioned to be sanctioned are the companies that have the strongest evidence and the strongest ties into Canada. And now it really is up to the Canadian government and lawmakers to do something about it. Thank you.
I would like to also invite Mr. Omar Kanat, who is the Executive Director of Uyghur Human Rights Project, based in Washington, D.C. And his organization has been instrumental for the passage of Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in the United States.
Thank you so much. So we are very grateful for the Canadian Parliament. Canadian Parliament was the first to recognize the Chinese treatment of Uyghurs as genocide and crimes against humanity in 2020. And also Canadian Parliament adopted this resolution on bringing M62, bringing 10,000 Uyghurs from around the world who are, living in different parts of the world and in danger of being deported back to China. But also we want Canada to cooperate with the U.S. in implementing this Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, because it will have the full impact if it is coordinated with the countries like Canada, because it has weak points. For example, we don't want Canada to become the dumping ground for the Uyghur forced labor products. Thank you so much.